So yesterday during this segment, I spent about 20 minutes explaining why, in my view, the psychology field is in large part, though not in every case, a scam. And as it happens, I feel much the same way about the university system. Not every college is a massively overpriced waste of money, but most are. Not every college student is getting bilked out of thousands of dollars for an education that isn't worth the paper it's printed on, but most are. So when you can combine these two things, the psychology field and the college system, that's when you really get into some very questionable territory. Again, not always, but often. And that brings us to Joshua Grubbs, a psychology professor who just wrote an article for The Hill announcing that the people concerned about the effects of pornography are engaged in a moral panic and should probably just calm down. Now, I'm going to read a sizable chunk of this and then respond to it. It's an excellent window into not only the flaws in the porn apologist argument, but also the limitations of the psychology field itself. Reading now, quote, "Many of the concerns about pornography lack grounding in what careful scientific research has taught us about pornography use. As a psychology professor and addiction researcher, I have made a career out of understanding pornography use and its effects, publishing dozens of scientific studies on the topic. Across that work, the most consistent finding is that simple narratives like porn is bad or porn is good are flawed. Such assertions and that argument and the arguments that underpin them always miss key information or are almost always wrong. Those who foment panic about pornography often claim that pornography leads to addiction and mental health problems, damages the brain, results in violence against women, and drives epidemics of sexual dysfunction. The science does not currently support these claims." Now, notice how this is being framed. He says that the statement porn is bad is flawed. It's a false narrative. He says that we know it's flawed and false because of the science. So he's entirely ignoring the fact that when most people say porn is bad, they don't mean it in a scientific sense. Good and bad are concepts that extend beyond the scientific realm. There is no science of good and bad. Science can tell us a lot about, things in the physical world, but it cannot tell us whether those things are good or bad. That is a qualitative and moral judgment. It's not a scientific one, but we'll return to that in a moment. Continuing, claims that pornography is inherently addictive are without basis. Some people do become out of control in their use of pornography, but the same can be said of exercise, shopping, or even working. Yet there is no rush to label most of those things as addictive because not every habitual behavior is an addiction. And just because some people develop real problems with pornography, it does not mean that pornography is inherently likely to lead to those types of problems for most users. The scientific and psychiatric communities do not currently consider excessive pornography use to be an addictive disorder. Dozens of studies have demonstrated that most people who view pornography do not feel addicted or out of control. Among people who do say they feel addicted, the reasons for those feelings range from real concerns about how much they view pornography to simple feelings of shame about their sexual behaviors. Okay, let's break this down. I actually agree that pornography is not addictive, but that's because I take a much, much, much more conservative view of addiction than most people, and certainly most psychologists. To my mind, the word addiction only makes sense and is only useful when we're talking about the physical chemical dependencies experienced by, fentanyl addicts and crackheads and people like that. Everything outside of chemical dependency is less an addiction and more a compulsion or a very strong habit, but in my opinion. But that's a different argument than what Professor Grubbs is presenting. Instead, he links to studies that he says show that most people who view pornography don't feel addicted. Now, the problems here are numerous and obvious. First of all, he employs a common method all throughout this article of linking to one study after another without taking the time to actually explain what these studies say exactly and how they were conducted and what their methodologies and findings were, et cetera. Instead, he simply provides a link to the studies, knowing, of course, that almost nobody's going to follow the links and actually read the many walls of text on the other end. Now, of course, I'm one of the weird people who will read a study when somebody claims it proves their case. Except here, I discovered that in some cases, the studies he links to are paywalled, and you have to give your credit card information to get the full text, and that's where I draw the line personally. The studies that I could read were extremely weak at best. And you could tell they're weak just from the way he describes them. Most porn users don't feel addicted. Is that really the bar we're setting? In order for it to be concerned, most have to be addicted? Do we apply that to anything else? I mean, most alcohol drinkers are not alcoholics. In fact, only around 8% of men who drink alcohol are alcoholics. Yet I'm pretty sure that Professor Grubbs would say that alcoholism is a major problem. If I tried to dismiss concerns about alcoholism by saying, well, most people who drink alcohol aren't alcoholics, I'd be laughed out of the room, as I should be. It's like, most? It has to be most in order for it to be an issue? 8% is a high enough number to qualify as a significant issue for alcohol, which is strange because one of his studies that he links to and assumes we won't read says that 11% of male porn users reported that they are addicted. Now, sure, 11% isn't most, but given the number of people who watch porn, it's extremely high. We're talking about millions of people here. Yet, this is all sort of irrelevant because it's all based on self-reported data from porn users who are telling us whether they personally feel addicted or not. Is this psychology professor really so clueless about human psychology that he doesn't understand that many times addicts don't feel addicted and won't tell you that they are addicted, even if everybody else in their lives can clearly see that they are? Does he truly not understand that? Like, I've encountered many alcoholics in my day who certainly would not describe themselves as alcoholics on a survey. That doesn't mean they're not alcoholics. Just as I'm quite sure that there are plenty of men who watch porn for hours a day and it's destroying their lives and destroying their marriages. Yet if you ask them, they'll tell you that they're fine and their porn use is not a problem. This is called denial, which again is something that a guy who teaches psychology should be able to grasp. Moving on, quote, similarly, although pornography can be associated with mental health concerns, most evidence suggests that links between its use and things like depression, anxiety, and stress are not causal in nature. Several studies have found no direct links between how often people use pornography and their likelihood of experiencing mental health problems in the future. People experiencing depression and anxiety might use pornography more, but there's no conclusive evidence that the pornography is the cause rather than the effect. Now, once again, we get the link to the studies that supposedly makes the case, but he doesn't tell us anything about the studies specifically. You'll notice that the professor so far has not actually made a single complete argument. Instead, he just assures us that other people have made these arguments and we can trust what they said, whoever they are exactly and whatever it is they actually said. According to Forbes, January is the hottest month for hiring, and business owners and hiring managers are on the hunt for top talent, which is no easy task. If you're currently hiring, you can probably relate. It's challenging to find qualified candidates, and that's why you need ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology finds the right people for your roles. And right now, you can try it for free at ZipRecruiter.com/Walsh. Immediately after you post your job, ZipRecruiter's smart technology starts showing you candidates whose skills and experience match it. To encourage top candidates to respond to your job post even sooner, ZipRecruiter lets you send them a personal invite to apply, and as you rate candidates, ZipRecruiter sends you more of the ones you like from the thousands of new job seekers who join the site. This month, find the talent you need to fill all of your roles with ZipRecruiter. See for yourself why 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Just go to this exclusive web address right now to try ZipRecruiter for free. ZipRecruiter.com/Walsh. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/WALSH. ZipRecruiter, smartest way to hire. One of the studies he provides required me to pay $17.95 for a PDF, and the other demanded $40 for access to the PDF. If you aren't willing to invest that money, and I'm not, then all you can do is read the abstract. And here's what I can glean from those. One of them apparently found that there is, in fact, a link between psychological distress and pornography use, except the study determined that the real cause of the psychological distress is the fact that the porn users perceived themselves to be addicted, even though we were just told that there's not really a problem with people perceiving themselves to be addicted, so whatever. So they're saying it's the perception of the addiction that causes distress, not the porn itself, the study claims. Now, the idea that a study based on self-reported data can somehow discern that psychological distress is rooted in a perception of porn addiction rather than the porn itself is just frankly stupid. I mean, here we have the researchers taking these subjective reports of the participants and using their subjective reports to arrive at their own subjective analysis of the root cause of the participants' distress. In other words, this is totally useless. This is not science. And yet the upshot is that this study, no matter how it tries to frame it, does find a link between psychological distress and porn. Now, the other study is even worse for the professor's case. This one uses a sample of 775 female and 514 male Croatian high school students who were surveyed 6 times over the course of a few years. Here's what the study found. Quote, "We observed no significant correspondence between growth in pornography use and changes in the 2 indicators of psychological well-being over time in either female or male participants." Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that as the participants used more pornography, they did not report feeling any worse about themselves over the years. Now, if you're a critical thinker, you might note that polling high school students about how they feel is not even close to an accurate way of measuring their actual well-being. And more importantly, you might also note that this only is measuring changes in their psychological state from the baseline, and the baseline is whatever their psychological state was at the start of the study. But what if these kids started using porn before high school, as many of them surely did, and negative psychological effects had already been suffered before the study started? In other words, what if their psychological baseline itself had been negatively impacted by porn use? Isn't that possible? Well, yes. It's not just possible. In fact, this study, the very study the professor cited as proof that porn doesn't negatively impact mental health, actually showed that it probably did negatively impact mental health. Reading now, it says, quote, however, a significant negative association was found between female adolescent pornography use and psychological well-being at baseline. This study's findings do not corroborate the notion that pornography use in middle to late adolescence contributes to adverse psychological well-being, but do not rule out such a link during an earlier developmental phase. So this is what happens when you read the studies. You quite often discover that people who cite studies are full of crap. And from there, the professor assures us that despite claims to the contrary, porn is not stunting neural development or changing people's brains. For this, he provides no links, no citations, no evidence, not even any studies, nothing. He just asserts it. And as for whether there's an association between porn and sexual violence, he tells us this, quote, while associations between sexual violence and violent pornography have been found in some research, these links are not present in all studies. Oh, so there are multiple studies finding a link between porn and sexual violence? Look, that's the headline here. But he says that's okay because not every study has shown that. So not every study shows a link between porn and sexual violence, and not everyone is addicted to porn, and so therefore it's okay. If you're keeping track at home, in this article that's supposed to be defending porn, we have been told that some studies have found a link between psychological distress and porn use, and between sexual violence and porn use. This, again, is in an article claiming that there's a moral panic around porn. Yet somehow I come away from this article hating porn even more than I did before I read it. And after utterly failing to make his case, the professor concludes this way, quote, ultimately, pornography is one form of media in a world that is more saturated than ever with media of all forms. Pornography has flourished in the internet era, so too have podcasts, streaming television, and digitized music. It is natural for parents, educators, and policymakers to be concerned about children's exposure to sexual media. It's also normal for people to worry about how new forms of media are affecting people of all ages. But moral panics based on fear and pseudoscience don't lead to effective parenting, education, or policy. Instead, what is needed is real support for science, seeking to understand how all media is affecting people, and a willingness to understand the science before making regulatory and policy changes. So that's the argument in closing. Drawing a moral equivalence between podcasts and pornography. That's how he wraps things up. That's the science, apparently. Except the problem, aside from the fact that the science, as we've seen, is mostly bogus and doesn't even say what he's saying it says, the problem is that this is not a scientific question. Porn is indeed bad, and it is bad because it dehumanizes and degrades and debases everybody involved. Porn turns people into objects, and it is bad for people to be made into objects. It is bad for them to be treated as objects and to see others as objects. Now, what does the science say about the degradation and objectification of the human person? Nothing. You cannot quantify moral degradation and objectification in a scientific study. Science can't tell us whether someone has been degraded or whether degradation is a good or bad or neutral thing. Just like science can't tell you that it's morally wrong to gossip or lie or steal. You know, if I steal from you and you confront me about it and you tell me that you're angry that I stole, it would make no sense for me to respond, oh yeah? Well, show me the study that says I shouldn't have stolen from you. Stealing is wrong because it's stealing, because you're taking a thing that doesn't belong to you. I don't know that because of the science. I just know it because it's true, because I'm a human being with a conscious mind. People get upset about stealing. There's a lot of stealing and looting and shoplifting happening right now across the country. People are rightly angry about it. That's not a moral panic. And even if it was, science wouldn't be able to tell us that. Science can't tell us about moral panics one way or another because science doesn't know what moral is and isn't. Professor Grubb set out to prove that the concerns over porn are a moral panic and then proceeded to write a lengthy article that says nothing at all about the subject the article is supposed to be about. Like, if you want to say that it's a moral panic over pornography, you need to make a moral argument. Tell me why. So it's a moral panic. Moral panic means that people are reacting to something and seeing it as a moral crisis when it's not, right? So explain why it's not a moral crisis. Explain why it's not a moral problem. He makes no argument. There's not one sentence that even comes close to making that kind of argument. All he has are studies, which are really not all that scientific and which don't even say what he claims they say, but even if they were and they did, they still would never be able to tell us whether porn is morally bad or not. But it is morally bad, profoundly so, because again, it degrades and lessens both the performer and viewer alike. You don't need a study to tell you that. That's what your soul is for. And we all have souls, even psychology professors, believe it or not. And this particular psychology professor is today canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.